pettiness wins. Everyone stay petty. It wins.
That's the sticker that I need you to have. Everyone stay petty.
What's good? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Newest Olympian. My name is Mike Schubert. I'm the titular Newest Olympian. I'm a 31-year-old man who never read the Percy Jackson books as a kid, but I did read them as an adult. I'm done with the main books. I'm going to eventually get to the other sequel books and stuff, but in the meantime, tackling all sorts of PJO spin-off things. And if you've been listening to the pod, you know that I just covered the bad movie, the Lightning Thief adaptation, two-parter where we just ripped it to shreds. But if we're in the spirit of ripping it to shreds, we have to talk about Rick Riordan ripping it to shreds. So to help us discuss that, we're having a fun two-part episode here. The first part, our first guest is someone that you may know as the head of LeakyCon, BroadwayCon, someone from Pottercast and Roll 9 3/4. Overall, great person. It's Melissa Anelli. Melissa, how's it going?
Nice to talk to you again. I love coming back to your shows.
It's always a delight to have you, whether it's Harry Potter stuff in the Potterless days or Percy Jackson stuff when we had you on TNO. Now we've got you back to discuss, I would say, something that's truly in your wheelhouse, which is, people dealing with frustrating situations and, being funny about it.
People dealing with frustrating situations is my job title. It is, let me tell you.
Seriously, I wanted you on because obviously, you're familiar with the series. You've read them. You knew about the movies, and being the person that you are in terms of fandom, not just Harry Potter, but all sorts of fandom, YA, adjacent, and all, I feel like you had a pretty good finger on the pulse of what things were like when the Percy Jackson movies came out. I knew there was a lot of hype around them, and then that hype was not met with a lot of enjoyable content. But I would love just to kind of go over a little bit about what happened with this movie when it was announced, when it was released, how it flopped amongst fans, but still did okay commercially, and then ultimately the Rick emails, which we'll touch on, and then we'll get into more detail with our second guest for the second half of this episode, because, they're a spicy.
Yeah, can you remind me the critical reaction and the box office reaction?
So financially, it still did very well. I pulled a bunch of information from Wikipedia. I like that back in my day of going to school, it was like, Wikipedia, you can't trust anything. And now it's like, you can't trust any news source except for Wikipedia. But Wikipedia says that it had a budget of $95 million, and the box office brought in $226.4 million. Pretty solid.
Yeah,
I'm guessing
solid.
Not as good as you would hope if you're really trying to say, like, this is going to be the next Harry Potter. Like, I'm sure that was astronomical, but that's still a pretty solid movie return, especially for one that, if we're getting into the critic stuff, it has a 49% on Rotten Tomatoes, average score of 5.3 out of 10. On Metacritic, it got a 47 out of 100, just not great. Mostly fans just absolutely hated it because it is just unrecognizable to the book series. Other people were just saying, like, it's a standard Hollywood product. It's unadventurous and uninteresting. That was Kenneth Turan from the LA Times.
Wow.
And then someone from the Washington Post said that the movie suffers by taking itself a little too seriously. It's not just that it's a lot less funny than the book, it's also a lot less fun, which is very accurate. And then on BBC Radio 5, Mark Kermode, criticized the similarity of the film to director Chris Columbus's Harry Potter films, likening it to a Harry Potter parody book and dubbing it Benjamin Sniddlegrass and the Cauldron of Penguins, which later sparked a satirical fan creation with that same title, narrated by Stephen Fry?
What?
People could get Stephen Fry to narrate fan fiction?
Wait,
How
this
do
is
you
a whole
do that?
subculture thing that I never knew happened.
I'm surprised you didn't know, but yeah, I've heard of this thing. It was made in 2011. On IMDb, 2011, a nerdy redhead from Cockfosters discovers that he is part of an ancient magical sect. Under the Eye of Pentangle, he heads to Australia to be taught the way of the Witter by eccentric Bavarian filmmaker Werner Herzog. So, I don't know. It's wild.
Wow, that was a lot of things in one sentence.
But Stephen Fry stars in it. He's the narrator in this film.
I cannot understand how that happened. I need the background documentary on Benjamin Sniddlegrass.
Yeah.
And how you get Stephen Fry to do that without lots and lots of money.
Right. And then especially how Benjamin Sniddlegrass went on to become Sherlock and Doctor Strange and all this other stuff. I love Benjamin Snodgrass and stuff.
Andrew Gristy?
Oh, I was just saying how Benjamin Snodgrass sounds like Benedict Cumberbatch. Yeah.
Oh, Benjamin. God. Oh, yeah. Oh, God. Yeah. Okay. I have a new mission. I need to find out more about Benjamin Snodgrass.
Benjamin Snodgrass has a 7.8 out of 10 on IMDb. So clearly we should be talking about that instead of this movie.
My favorite review that I'm seeing is a slab of market research in search of an actual movie. That is that's pithy.
That's pretty good.
Really good. I mean, what I remember about this time is that there was a sort of fandom eye roll that Chris Columbus got attached to it. And then he started saying things in interviews. Actually, I have one of them pulled up here that says that he was like running away from any comparison to Harry Potter. It was like,
interesting.
Yeah, but you can't pretend that that's not why you
can't add in the Marauders map into the movie and say it's not like Harry Potter.
Yeah, it's bad.
Dude, you got to have a little self-awareness. Like, there's a reason why you were hired. And frankly, he did a good job with the Harry Potter movie. So, like, it's not an insult. I'm not going to run away and act like people aren't listening to this one because Potterless was a big hit. Like, yeah, man, there's some people who didn't know me from that, but, like, I'm not going to act like my podcasting career has not been able to continue because Potterless was a huge freaking deal.
Yeah, this is the quote. To a certain extent, I felt like if there were any similarities, I really, really tried hard to remove them from the film, except for that big, giant one.
Yeah, there's a lot of other stuff. Like, he turns Chiron into Dumbledore. There's a lot of things that it's really frustrating. The other thing is, like, what else did you think you got hired for? Christmas with the Cranks? Like, come on, Chris Columbus.
Christopher Columbus was known for how well he worked with kids, which is one of the reasons that he got hired for Harry Potter. So that being true, why did they age them up to adults?
Yeah.
Why is this not a kid's movie?
And that's something that Rick points out in the emails quite a bit, is that it seems like they were trying to go after the teen audience, which I guess when this one came out, this was after Twilight, right? So was this weirdly like trying to do two things at the same time, where it's like we want it to be a big magical series like Harry Potter, but we want it to hit the teen demographic like Twilight? Is that what they had in mind?
Do you think it was literally so that people wouldn't say it's just Harry Potter over again?
I wonder.
Because that's what always gets leveled at the Percy Jackson books, even though they came up at the same time and all that stuff.
Right.
It's the easy comparison. And that's useful in a lot of ways because you get people into it by saying, oh, this is, if you liked Harry Potter. But I think maybe they were so afraid, and especially with Chris Columbus attached, it's just going to be the same thing and they wouldn't be able to escape any comparison.
Yeah.
So that might have even been behind a lot of the aging up.
I think the Twilight stuff was intentional because this is referenced in the letters, but I use my smart literal analysis brain. He does the thing where he X's out names of stuff, but it's pretty clear. I think he's talking about the Twilight movies because one of the producers is Karen Rosenfeld. They were one of the producers that made the Twilight films. And there's a quote that Rick has in one of the emails that's like, don't let them do to Percy Jackson what they did to XXXXX. So I'm pretty sure that was a reference to Twilight because the producers on this film are Karen, who was involved in the Twilight stuff, Chris Columbus, and Michael Barnathan, who are both Harry Potter people, and then Mark Radcliffe, who doesn't have a Wikipedia hyperlink. So I had to go to IMDb to figure out what he worked on, and he was also a Harry Potter person. And then he also worked with Chris Columbus on Fantastic Four, because I think Chris Columbus at least did the Fantastic Four sequel, which is like the first Fantastic Four movie that wasn't good, and then the sequel one was even worse.
And everybody thought that Mark Radcliffe was like associated with Dan, and he was not.
Yeah. You've got some Chris Columbus folks and then a Twilight person. So it feels like they were trying to bring the two together. And it's just an absolute mess. And then you even have quotes from Chris Columbus leading up to the release of the film saying that they had sequels in mind, which makes no sense to me. One, with the aging up of the characters, and two, with taking things from later installments and putting it in, such as having them fight the Hydra in the first movie, even though the Hydra shows up in the second book. And then also not having the main villain of The Lightning Thief, Ares, or the main villain of the series, Kronos, show up at all.
Right. No foreshadowing, no nothing.
None. I don't know how you can claim you're making this film with a series in mind, but not keep into account like the two most crucial factors in it, like the age, which keeps the prophecy going. Like, it really feels like, and Rick identifies this in one of his emails, I don't think they read the first book, but I don't think they touched on anything past the first book. And it's so confusing because you look at the first Harry Potter movies and they are so faithful. Like, the first movie is arguably like too faithful to the book.
I agree with that, yeah. And then 2 is mostly faithful.
So how do you go from that to this?
Who wrote it? Who's the writer? Craig Titley, and Rick Riordan has a credit?
I'm surprised he has a credit because
That must have been a contractual thing.
It's gotta be, because I don't even think, maybe it showed up in the trailers, but like when you watch the film, there's no sort of like based on the best-selling series by Rick Riordan. Like he's tried to distance himself as much as he can while still dunking on it as often as possible, which is, I think, a very fun area to operate. But yeah, it says the screenplay was by Craig Titley. Oh, he did Scooby-Doo in 2002?
I know. Cheaper by the Dozen, Star Wars, Clone Wars.
Here's a question. Cheaper by the Dozen too. They should have taken the 101 Dalmatians approach. They should have added a new person and called it Cheaper by the Baker's Dozen.
Totally.
What are we doing? What are we doing?
What are we even doing here?
This guy has such a strange career. Yeah, you're right. He's got great TV stuff and bad film.
Do you see his
TV
first
stuff.
credit?
Conspiracy theory quote, "Did we land on the moon?" No, that's a real documentary.
Ooh. I don't know how I feel about him right now.
Co-executive producer of the documentary, which does not have a Wikipedia hyperlink, so that's how you know it's good. Conspiracy theory, "Did we land on the moon?" All right, I now know not to like Craig Titley.
If you go look at everybody who's on it, it is like a parade of white men
who
are of a certain age on this. Wow, this is like pre-MAGA.
To put conspiracy theory in the title is pretty fantastic. Oh, wow. Look at top cast. One of the guys is Bill Casing. He's there as Moon Hoax Investigator.
Wait, what?
That's his title in the documentary, is Moon Hoax Investigator. I'm not sure that that's a job title.
I'm not sure how much investigating he's
LinkedIn.
doing if he's calling it a hoax. Are you truly investigating, or are you just going, I think it's a hoax.
Oh my
I've investigated.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Hilarious. All right, well, that's the guy that wrote that movie.
So that's who did the screenplay.
Okay. Well, at least we know he has a fantastical imagination.
Right. Yeah. So as far as like fandom stuff going on, obviously you're largely involved in the Harry Potter fandom. Were Harry Potter fans? I know there's a lot of people who read both. Were people excited about the movie? Were people like, oh man, stepping on our turf? Like, how does it all go when a new YA book series was becoming a film franchise like it was happening after the success of Harry Potter?
What was weird is that everybody was the next Harry Potter, right? Everything. Okay. So every time we heard of anything, it was like, this is just like it. This is the next thing. But Percy Jackson was sort of like, was the other comparable Harry Potter. Mm-hmm. But then they started trying to act like it wasn't. So it was kind of confusing. Mm-hmm. Like, do you want Harry Potter fans big on this or do you not? We would get a little bit eye-rolly when people would start, oh, this is just like Harry Potter, because it was like, yeah, tell me a new one. But people really liked Percy Jackson. It was like, oh, I've read this also. Because Harry Potter fans are readers. They're big readers. That's why I get mad when anybody says read another book, because they're giant readers. Well, they do.
I feel like people who say read another book are people who have read 0 books. Like
100%.
At least even if they only have read Harry Potter and they're rereading Harry Potter every year, I feel like they're probably pulling more than you, Richard.
Yes. Correct, Richard.
But not you, Richard, listening to the podcast. You're one of the good ones.
Yes, 100%. You've read at least 2. You're doing great. So we were excited about it because it could be another big mystery to pull apart. And I know that we were reading them as they came out. And as an adult during that time, I didn't like spend as much time on Percy Jackson as I did on Harry Potter. But yeah, there was a lot of affinity and a lot of like hopes for it to do well. I think the turfy stuff happened with, and I mean turfy in the true sense of the word, not the capital.
Not the current. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Not the current. TURF is what I'm talking about with Twilight.
Yeah.
Because everybody was like, there was like a weird like rivalry. Like,
yes. Okay.
Oh, it's better. They would say about Twilight. I'd be like, no. It's a different type of thing, everybody. It's okay. We were kind of rooting for it. And then it came out and, was bad.
Yeah.
Also, this was like after the books were done.
Yeah, the timeline is that the film rights were purchased in 2004, which is before the first book even came out. And then in April of 2007, Chris Columbus was hired to run the project as a director-producer. And then filming began in 2009, and then the movie released in February of 2010.
It makes a lot of sense because 2004 is right when the Harry Potter movie franchise was really taking off. And they were looking for the next thing. So somebody came to them and said, this is going to be the next,
Right. Yeah. And Rick has said in the past about the movie rights and everything that when he submitted I'm not sure of the proper book terms. The manuscript, like when he submitted the, hey, I'm making this book for The Lightning Thief, he first did it under a pseudonym because he was afraid that it was going to get like trashed. So he was really embarrassed and shy about it. And then there was like a huge auction for it, like almost instantly. And then Disney Hyperion won the book rights. And then I guess 20th Century Fox / Fox 2000, Rick calls it sometimes, they won the film rights right away. And Rick has admitted on his website that he did that mainly just to build hype for the book. Like he was, you know, which I guess is an author thing, is like a news article will say, and the film rights have already been purchased. And then people will go, whoa.
Also, it was different at the time. How it worked with Harry Potter was that they held on to every bit of rights back in when she sold the initial manuscript. The first offers were like basically all the rights for a very small amount of money. And her agent, who was Christopher Little at the time, said, beg, borrow, steal to do whatever you have to do to survive right now. We're going to take a lesser offer and hold on to every single right. Mm-hmm. So then they had to come back to her to get the rights from her. And at that point, the book was already a success. So it was already, and she was able to negotiate for a lot more control on the series. Like she was able to do unprecedented things with her contract. They couldn't just Marvelize it immediately. Right. They had to make her story, which is like, it's unheard of. And so if your book hasn't sold yet and you sell the rights, even if you're a big author, even if you're a non-author, even if it's at auction, you probably are giving away the store, which is totally normal and totally fine for an author to do because they don't expect to have that kind of control. Everybody knows the movie people are just going to take it and run with it. That's, I think, a little different these days. And so these agreements that are like 10 years old or whatever haven't caught up with the reality that the movie studios want to brag about how much it is true to the source material that comes from Harry Potter, and Twilight benefited from that because it was a positive to say, no, we've worked so closely with the author. We understand the fans. Yeah. I used to get so much dismissal from like Warner Brothers execs, et cetera, for being like the fan outlet. A lot of like, why would we talk to the fan site? You know, that kind of thing.
Right.
And then slowly over time, they sort of started to realize, well, hang on, this embedded audience will do more marketing for you than you've ever seen in your life. You should be really nice to them. And suddenly that's become part. You don't hear about books being made into movies these days that don't honor, at least in some way. Yeah. Like, for instance, look at Last of Us. It is different in a lot of ways from the video game, but in ways that are true to the spirit and have all the right elements in there. And they're able to sell it as, we work with the creators, we made the right true story, and we made changes to change it for the format. Right. Which is what he's arguing for in the letters.
Yeah, and that's what the Disney Plus series sounds like.
Yes.
What they're currently doing for Percy Jackson sounds like, from everything that I've been able to learn from interviews and reading stuff about it and everything Rick said about it. Like, it feels like that is what they're doing for this. But the fan thing you bring up is very interesting because I think Rick Riordan was keen into that before it became something that movie studios or TV studios or whatever, before they really thought about that. Because in Rick's emails, he mentions, you're going to lose the fans. You're going to lose the people who I've been talking to for years on book tours. That was something I didn't realize, is that he was doing book tours the whole time between the start of this production process. So I guess even like as early as 2007, and then the release in 2010. I think on his website, he says for the past 3 years, or the past 4 years, people are asking like, oh my gosh, they're making the movie. Are you excited? And he's been hyping it up for years. And then he gets to see the script and it's terrible and he just hates it. But he's warning them, like, if you're aging things up and you're making the script more raunchy, you're going to lose the main people who are going to see this. And it's like weirdly the movie version of not recognizing like the main Taylor Swift album buying demographic is like moms buying CDs for kids. Like, that's why for the longest time, like, you know, oh, people aren't doing CDs anymore, but Taylor Swift makes more money on physical CDs than anything. It's like, yeah, you have to keep in mind like who is the demographic. And I think that's probably why this movie still did well, even though it sucked, was that you had a lot of people just going like, oh, it's the book series, either that my kid likes, or I know this is a kid's book series, so let me bring families. And if the movie was good, then yeah, you would have a whole franchise. But it seems like they didn't have that fan admiration in mind, thinking that the fans would drive it. And now people do recognize it, and sometimes arguably like too much when you have some things. I don't want to like pick a particular fandom. I'll just say like like Wars of the Stars, for example, just like to make one up out of thin air where, you know, people get really mad about like diversity and they're like, oh, we got to change everything. Oh, man.
Yeah. Wars of the Stars.
just to make something out of thin air.
You know. So my favorite like overall takeaway from this letter is I can literally imagine the executives opening this letter up and it looking like the wall of text they got from an ex.
Oh,
you know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And them being like, F this guy, like, you know, just being so pissed that the writer dares, you know, I can like when he said like, this is really terrible and I'm the only person who can fix it. Mm-hmm. And while I agree with him, I can just see the people sitting in their office going, who the hell does this guy think he knows nothing about movies, you know?
Yeah,
we're funny.
We will go basically line by line through the letters after the break with our next guest. But I do find it funny that the first one exudes a healthy amount of no worries if not energy, which I am constantly exuding in my life in all facets. If I'm emailing potential sponsors, if I am trying to schedule live shows, if I am asking my friends if they want to go to dinner, like I am always being like, oh, don't worry, I just want to throw it out there. But he's very much taking a respectful like, hey, I heard this thing. Let me just give some potentially helpful advice. Maybe it'll work. I just have a bit of concern about what I've heard. Here's just some thoughts. And it's like short, sweet, and succinct. And then the second one, he just goes into like, all right, so I heard some stuff. I read the script. Here's the things that I like. Other than this is ass.
This is amazing. No, it's great. Respect. I mean, it's such a different situation now because people somehow it got knocked into movie producers. The story that people love and can't stop buying and can't stop interacting with is the actual story they want to see on the screen.
Yeah.
It's not you flexing how different you can make it, or it's not like they want to see the real story. There's nothing wrong with retelling a story that's literally in the books. Yeah. It's just shocking that it takes that long, but it didn't take that long for everybody. I mean, look at the Pride and Prejudice, the real Pride and Prejudice,
Colin
the
Firth?
BBC one.
Yes.
Ooh, Colin Firth.
Baby.
The obsession with the other one, I don't understand.
I don't get it. I think it's just because Keira Knightley's in it and people like Keira Knightley, which is valid. She's very likable.
I agree. And what's his name from Succession?
Tom. Yeah, I do love him. But like the thing is, and I will talk about this for days. I will scream it from the mountaintops. You cannot do Pride and Prejudice in one movie. This is
2
why
hours.
It's not enough because the book is very long, and you need to go through Elizabeth's feelings towards Darcy. Mm-hmm. You need to marinate in this guy sucks so much for a while, and then you need to get to like, oh, maybe he doesn't suck. He's actually done some nice things that he's kept quiet. And then he's like, oh man, the proposal, are you kidding me? And then it's like, oh, but he does like her. Like that needs to happen over a long period of time. Yes.
It's a satire. It's not a rom-com. And they made it into a rom-com. And it's plotted so meticulously, and you're just going to go in there and like, it's like somebody going into a car and just ripping up the wires and just like reconnecting one short wire to make the car kind of go. I'm so into cars. I'm sure you can tell. But no, they botched it. Mm-hmm. But it's, my friend Cheryl calls it the Pride and Prejudice WTF version.
It's not even like the fault of the filmmakers. It's just like format wise, you cannot turn that book into a movie. 2 hours is not enough time.
No, you need a series.
It is a long process that you need to like marinate with. And it's got to be a series.
But that's why this Percy series is great.
Yes.
Because then they can actually spend some time with the characters and have them grow. Long ago, I would have been excited about the same thing for Harry Potter.
But not anymore.
Not anymore.
But the thing is, you can still turn these books into good movies. Like the Harry Potter movies are good. And the Hunger Games movies, I think, are good. I stopped reading the second book halfway through because I didn't like the book. But like all things I've heard.
The Hunger Games? You have to.
I loved Peeta a lot. And I didn't like the Peeta erasure that Katniss as narrator was doing in the early goings of book 2. I've seen all the movies.
You have to finish the series.
I watched all the movies and I really, really enjoyed them. But I just like, I was so team Peeta that I couldn't stand reading a book narrated by someone who was like on the fence. I was like, it's so obvious. So I know it's a me problem, but I was just so adamantly team Peeta.
The best thing that ever was said to me about the Peeta Gale thing was Gale brings Katniss protein. Peeta brings her carbs. She needs carbs. And it was just so correct. But listen, book 3, I will go to my grave with this opinion. Book 3 of Hunger Games is one of the best treatises on war and sacrifice and what that does to people, it's amazing.
Okay.
You should finish them.
I should. I now that I'm not a grumpy teenager or however old I was when I was reading.
Also, like Suzanne Collins writes like a movie writer. Yeah. She writes to just keep you moving from page to page to page to page.
And that's the thing that's so frustrating about this Percy Jackson movie is that you read it and you're just like, yeah, I can see how this turns into a movie. Like, not to say that it's not a hard job to screenplay adapt things. I know nothing about it.
Oh, it's very hard. Yeah.
By reading the book, it's just like, it feels like you could just do it. And that's what's so funny of all the interviews that I got to do with the production staff making the Percy Jackson Disney Plus show. And I'll post stuff to the podcast feed where I talk with those people. I asked these people all these questions about like, how'd you come up with this? What'd you think about this? And like every person in every different facet was like, oh, we just kind of like read the book. Just every single person's like, yeah, the book's pretty good. So we just did that.
Yeah, the book's good. Like, yeah, it's not that hard. This is not rocket science.
It's not rocket science, but thank you for giving the context of what it was like in the time, what it was like in comparison to the Harry Potter thing. I think it just like makes sense to make those comparisons on so many levels in terms of like what these movies were going for. Obviously, the book series are similar and also the movie series are similar, and they've got Chris Columbus in both of them. So like, I think that's a natural comparison to make.
Right.
I guess just before we go, any parting thoughts on like Chris Columbus? I don't know if you've ever interacted with him or knew things about him. Like, is he a nice guy? Should I not be trashing him so much just because he did a bad job on the film? Like, what's the Columbus vibe?
Oh, from all accounts, he is a truly nice, wonderful human being. Like, okay. I have no hate on Chris Columbus as a person at all. Every time I've spoken to Chris Columbus on the various red carpets, junkets, for my book, just a gentleman up and down. So, you know, there's a reason somebody like that is known for working well with kids. Whatever you think of his movie-going history, he's had a lot of success.
Yeah.
Nice guy. Maybe not the best choice for this particular movie at that time.
All right. Well, at least now I know I don't have to hate him as the person. I can just hate him for his professional work.
We love that. We can disagree with the person's professional work and still know they are a nice person. But sometimes, and I'm just saying sometimes, once in a blue moon, somebody who you equated their professional work with their goodness as a person, sometimes that turns out the other way. And so I just advise caution.
Yes. Thank you for this warning for all of us. Melissa, if people want to find you doing stuff, where can they find you?
LeakyCon.com, BroadwayCon.com. My Twitter is at Melissa Anelli, but I hate Twitter, X, whatever the hell it's called now. So I'm probably going to move over to Threads. Just my name on all the things. If you just Google me, you'll find it.
LeakyCon, I was there last year doing TNO stuff. I may or may not have replied to an email a couple hours ago about doing it for next year. So like, you know,
for next year,
who's to say?
We're working on Portland, July 5th through 7th.
Right.
In Portland, Oregon. We're so excited.
You won't even have to take a day off if you go to the Friday sessions. Come on.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, I think it's pretty fun.
Good stuff.
Yeah, cool. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it. We're now going to take our mid-roll break of the episode, the lightning brief, and then we'll come back to really go into the emails. Ho, ho, ho. Hello and welcome to the Lightning Brief back in New York City edition. Shout out to everybody who came to the Paris show. And now I'm excited to tell you about what's going on with the podcast. First and foremost, thank you to everyone who watched the stream yesterday at the time of listening to this. I'm recording this one before the stream on Saturday, December 2nd, because we're going to get this episode up early for patrons. Patrons get early ad-free episodes. But I'm sure the stream tomorrow/yesterday was a blast. You still can watch it. So if you go to the newsolympian.com/Patreon, you can watch the watch along party that I did with Erica from Seaweed Brain and Phoebe and Emily from Monster Donut and Sherry Guo, our own editor, and Bobby Wagner and Alyssa Esteban, where we watched the Sea of Monsters movie. You can watch the replay of it with full live chat replay if you join any of the TNO tiers at the newsolympian.com/Patreon. So that should be a fun time for you. You get to watch the whole thing. You can watch it as many times as you want. You get the live chat replay so you can see what the chat was saying. And the Patreon has a whole bunch of other stuff. Bonus episodes, monthly Q&A live streams, director's commentary. There's all sorts of fun things. And holidays are here. And something that you can do for the holidays, you can gift someone a Patreon subscription. Not officially. There's not like an official way to do it on Patreon. But we've had people in the past sign up for Patreon accounts and then give friends the login and then make the name something, paying homage to the person they're giving the gift to. Look, you can do whatever you want here. There's no rules for supporting. There's no no wrong way to support the show on Patreon, except by not doing it. Just kidding. If you don't have the money, or if you're under 18 and you legally can't, don't worry about it. You just listening to the show support enough. But if you do go the extra step on Patreon, I really do appreciate that. And I think that's pretty cool. Now, other stuff that's going on with the podcast. In December, we've got the live shows in Texas. We've got a show in Dallas on December 13th, and we've got a show in Austin on the 15th, and San Antonio on the 17th, and Houston on the 19th. I will say that we will be covering the second Percy Jackson movie for the first 3 shows. So Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, we'll be talking about the Sea of Monsters movie. I'm not sure what we're going to do in Houston quite yet. Potentially the musical, potentially one of the spin-off books. I'm not exactly sure. But make sure you're following the Newest Olympian on Instagram or Twitter. We're at Newest Olympian, and you can follow us there and see what we're going to be covering. But it's going to be very fun. Stephen Parr will be at the San Antonio show. My sister Meghan will be at the Dallas show. Kelly will be at the shows running the merch table. It's going to be a fun time. So if you want to get tickets to those Texas live shows, you can go to thenewestolympian.com/live. You will also find tickets there for the Florida shows that we're doing in February, as well as the Denver and Phoenix shows that we're doing in February. And if you live in the North Carolina area, just stay tuned for an announcement about March shows in the near future. And an update on the merchandise front, we are almost out of beads again. So if you want to get them before we sell out a second time, go to thenewsolympian.com/merch. We've got beads with jokes of the first set of episodes of TNO. And I know that the Camp Regular Person shirts are out of stock of most sizes. So I've contacted my merch department about restocking those. I also know that the pens are out of stock. So I've contacted about restocking those. You all are lovely, and you went big on buying stuff around the holidays. So thank you for this lovely problem that we have, which is getting stuff back on the store. So I'm trying to figure all that out. Again, just stay tuned either here in Mid-Roll Breaks or on social media for updates about all of those. And we mentioned the Patreon earlier. Seems like some folks have joined in prep for the stream. We've got a fresh new batch of patrons in the mix. So let's give a shout out to the folks who have joined recently. Shout out to our new Super God Tier patrons, Avery Gray dos Santos and Laura Sophie Manzer. Shout out to our newest God Tier patrons, Willa, Doom Puppy, Jess, Leah, Allison S, Lethargic God, Nor, Ian Phillips, Kira Nielsen, and someone who made their name happy birthday to Josh Sayer. See, you can give a gift of Patreon. And shout out to our newest Demigod tier patrons, Haley Portier, Mimic, Neve and Bree, Danielle Blend, Mallory Rasco, Robert Palecchio, Pepin Bozeman, Rain Mist, Veronica Rowlandson, Kristen Moreno, Claire Victoria, Emily Lund, Hibiscuit, Mariana of the Trench, Alex Prentice, Tina Athena, Laurel Jimenez, KS, Juliana Jaragri Suarez. Or should those J's be like H's? Is it Juliana Juaragui Suarez? Please send me a DM. Let me know if I got that right. Stiofi, Stevie Puma, Kelinchi, Evangelina Briggs, Buford, Max McCord, and Nemo X. And a name correction for Erica Allender. Thank you all so much for your support. May Hypnos bless you that you don't have that thing happen where you wake up like an hour before you're supposed to be up, which makes you feel like, should I just get up? Should I just go back to sleep? What do I do? Then your body's like, we should get up. And I'm like, but I want to sleep for another. Hopefully Hypnos can just make sure that you get up when you need to and you feel refreshed. And if you're all caught up on the Newest Olympian and you're looking for a new podcast to listen to, I make a whole bunch of podcasts. I think you would enjoy them, especially if you enjoy this one, because I work on this podcast and I work on all these other podcasts that I do as an independent podcast boy. One of those podcasts is Modern Muckraker, bit of a different style from TNO, but still very fun. It is a scripted show. It's a comedic investigative journalism show, so it sounds like you're listening to something from NPR doing really intense research. We interviewed highly overqualified experts, but the questions that we were answering were inherently very silly, but we presented them as if they were incredibly serious, and it was important what we were answering. The questions are, when should Spider-Man take the subway instead of web swinging? Is the budget of East High School realistic for a public school in Albuquerque, New Mexico? If you lost half of an orchestra, what remaining instruments would make the worst possible sound? And how many IHOPs can you visit and eat free pancakes at during one National Free Pancake Day? All those episodes can be listened to right now by searching for Modern Muckraker wherever you get your podcasts, or by going to our website, modernmuck.com. Now, before I wrap up here, you're going to hear words from a few sponsors who make it feasible for me to be a full-time podcaster. Some of those ads will be read by me. Others of them won't. The ones that aren't read by me are inserted locally. So if you live in Texas, don't be surprised if you hear an ad for my live shows, because I also do geo-specific ads where if the show is coming to a city near you, you'll hear that. But maybe you'll hear something Texas-y too. Maybe the ads will be in a southern accent. I don't know. But once those ads are complete, we'll get back into this episode of the Newest Olympian to talk about the emails. What's good? And welcome back to this current episode of the Newest Olympian. It's part 2 as we get into the actual emails from Rick Riordan. We've had the contextual scene laying of what led to these emails. And now it's time for the emails. And we have a very special guest, someone that I only got to meet through a TNO live show happening when I was on tour in Europe through a mutual friend. So the podcast has created friendships, and now here we are. It is someone that you might know from their incredible work writing comic books and movies and podcasts, so many wonderful things. Meghan Fitzmartin. Meghan, how's it going?
It's going so well. I'm so excited, truly honored and surprised to be here, if only because I have loved Percy Jackson for so long. And like, we both didn't realize that you didn't know that I liked Percy Jackson. And so
it's all coming together. It's all been a fun whirlwind. We met because of the London show, which was a very fun time. And now here we are. Before we get into the emails, what's your history with the Percy Jackson books? When did you read them?
I read them in college. It was really, I think, beneficial because I was reading them in college. I went to school to be a youth pastor. And so I went to a very religious college. And a lot of the Percy Jackson books are on sort of looking at your identity and looking at the religious structures that you come from and analyzing whether or not they are servicing you and whether or not the things that you've known your whole life are true or not. So they were really important for my reckoning with certain aspects of religion. And I found out about them because I think I was dating a guy at the time, and he recommended many things to me that I hated, but Percy Jackson was the one that I was like, you know what? Maybe all of your tastes aren't horrible because this is pretty great.
At least one good thing has come out of this relationship.
One good thing has come out of, he was fine, but like his recommendations were sus at best. And this particular one, I was like, you know what? This is really up my alley. I have read all the Percy Jackson books. I have read all of the Heroes of Olympus books. Papa Rick is one of the best humans on the planet, as far as I'm concerned. He's wonderful.
A good dude.
Yeah,
he's a good dude. I'm excited. You will certainly be on the podcast in the future to cover Heroes of Olympus, which will happen in the near future. So I'm excited for that. But let's not waste any time. Let's get into these emails. We've teased the listeners enough by laying the groundwork for the emails. So here we are. You can find these emails still on Rick Riordan's website. They are under the news section on his website. If you just kind of search for Rick Riordan emails, Chris Columbus, it does pop up. But this was posted on November 16th, 2018, and it is titled Memories from My TV/Movie Experience.
I can't believe that they're up. Like, I love so much that he's like, you know what? I don't care. I'm going to tell you. Like, there's a beauty of full transparency. Like, I work in entertainment, and you don't get this kind of transparency very often of like, I was very frustrated with this and I will let people know about it because everyone's always so focused on being so nice all the time.
Right. I am intrigued to know, as someone who has had to deal with some contract stuff that is not fun, I would love to know the details of his contract because clearly it was like something expired, or maybe when Disney bought back the rights or whatever it was. There was something where contractually he felt no concern for just trashing people without mentioning them explicitly by name. And that's fantastic for him.
I think that he has reached a certain aspect of, I don't know if it's confidence within self or like trusting his own instincts, which I think is really important as a creative to be like, I don't have to play nice because this is a multi-million-dollar IP property that you want to come to me. You want to, and in a way, like, listen, there are mean ways in which he could have gone about this. And this is so tame comparatively to so many of those other ways. But like, it to me speaks of, I understand the property that I have created and I understand my value to this. And I had a bad time and I don't want to have a bad time again.
Yeah. So what sparked this posting is he opens up saying that he recently asked his audience what kind of team they would like to see in charge of a Disney-led Percy Jackson reboot if it happened. I would love to see, maybe it does exist, but like, what did you think people were gonna say? Like, do people have favorite producers? Like, I'm very confused by the predecessor to this post where he's like, hey guys, if someone was running it, who would you want to be the showrunner? Like, I don't know if like the normal fan knows that.
I think in this day and age they do though. Like, it is really interesting. It's really dependent on your fandoms and it's really dependent on, so like I used to work for a show called Supernatural. I was able to write on it. And like, I was so impressed by the amount of knowledge that our fandom knew about like who the showrunners were. And like they didn't always get everything right in terms of who made what decisions, but for the most part, they were still pretty media literate. And I think that that is sort of true for the continuing age. So I remember when he posted this because I saw this and was like, this is a really interesting thought experiment. Like, yeah, it's a weird one, but like in terms of asking people like, what directors do you like? What writers do you like? I think those are really interesting questions that you can ask an audience, especially if it's your audience that like you've had a pretty good relationship with it. Like he's had a really great relationship with his fandom and with that audience. And so being able to reach out and go, I don't know what works here. I don't exist in this industry all that much. What are your thoughts on this? Is a really like, it's almost a Taylor Swift move.
Yes, I love it. Taylor Swift came up in part 1 of this episode, so I love her continuing to come up. This podcast is just slowly but surely becoming a Taylor Swift and Pride and Prejudice podcast.
Listen, my two faves, and I will forever bring up, listen, you've now created a challenge for me. I will bring up Pride and Prejudice in this as well.
It's going to be, I trust your ability to do so. So Rick continues in this first post saying, again, I have to warn you, this is completely hypothetical, just wishful thinking, not based on any concrete plans in the pipeline. That feels like a lie, but I'm glad he is trying to temper the expectations in November of 2018. But it feels like you don't write this unless you have some sort of confidence that something's going to happen, or at least that like it's not impossible.
Yeah, I mean, my guess is there were conversations. So this was when Fox had been bought by Disney.
Yeah,
and Disney's going to look at the IP that Fox owned previously, and they're going to look at what makes us the most money and how do we continue to make money, because that is the business. So those conversations, I'm sure somebody reached out to Rick Riordan and were like, hey, you know how this was not a fun time for you? Can it be a fun time for you?
Let's have some fun. So he goes on to warn that even if a reboot happened, quote, I would have zero, in all caps, control over it, explaining that the rights were signed away before the first book was published and he gave Hollywood all of the control. It is funny that now we're in a world where he is like considered a co-creator and producer and all these other titles, and Becky is in the mix as well, which is super cool.
Becky, yeah. I do think that, this is a side note, but I do think that it's a really good example of how far the industry has come and the writing side has come, especially post-writer's strike. I think that that's something worth pointing out.
Yeah, no, 100%. He clarifies a bit just about how, like, normally authors don't get a lot of control. Anyone that has had that happen is an exception. We talked about that in part 1. And here is why he is saying all of this really about the control stuff, because it's basically a way to say, I wasn't to blame for the movies. He says, quote, nobody talks about that, though, because when a movie is just coming out, it is in the studio's interest for it to sound like everyone was very involved and pleased with the final product. In reality, the best we authors can hope for is a good team effort where everyone gets along, has the same vision, and works together well. Sometimes that happens, ... spaced out ellipsis. Not even ellipsis all put together. It's like period, space, period, space, period.
You can really feel the pettiness in every single space.
Each period dripping. Dripping. He continues saying that thinking of a hypothetical reboot has him recalling the process that he went through with, quote, those Percy Jackson movies. Incredible use of those. Oh.
I mean, he's a writer. Like, he knows exactly what he's saying, how he's saying it.
Yep. He says that he was consulted at some points about some of the things, and he did his best to give helpful feedback. He clarifies that he could not share information at the time, but now that those conversations are almost a full decade old at the time of writing this, and then he adds in parentheses, yikes, with an exclamation point. Adorable. He thought that the fans would appreciate a peek behind the curtain. Quote, I hope this will give you a sense of what I was trying to do behind the scenes. Elite use of trying.
Yeah. It's so bold.
Yeah. He says, whether / how much the producers listen to my ideas, I will let you be the judge. He hates these things so much. He reiterates that, as he has said multiple times, he stepped away from the production for his own peace of mind when he saw the final script and saw what they were doing on set. And honestly, I cannot blame him. Have you seen the film?
Oh, yes.
Thoughts in general?
I get what they were trying to do. And look, I don't have the credibility that Rick Riordan has, so I can't go on record as bashing anything. And not that I would, because I think the problem and the joy are the same thing when you're making something in the entertainment industry. It is a collaboration across the board. And some people do have more say on some things and some people don't. You don't always have control over how the chips fall and like what that sort of comes to be. Like, I remember having a good time when I watched the movie. Like, I had a fun time. I didn't watch it again, which I'm a chronic rewatcher, so I do think that says something. But like, as a movie experience, and if it were separate from the books, I think they're very fun. They're a fun movie. But I think that the books are so rich and the books are so full. And I mean, the major decision that everybody talks about, and I know he goes on to say this in a little bit later, but the major decision that everyone talks about is aging them up. Yeah. Once again, I get why that happens. It's a conversation that is still happening in LA about YA and about, like, nobody wants to age down anything. A lot of those conversations exist because of money, frankly.
Yeah, filming with kids is harder. It takes longer, it costs more money, there's more restrictions.
Filming with kids is harder, but also beyond that, when you are making something, you are thinking about who's going to buy it. And there is less buying power from teenagers and younger audiences, like the middle grade audience, which is what this movie is essentially for.
And should have been, but they tried to make it more teen.
Exactly. And so you get people making decisions so that like 18 to 35-year-olds would buy it, not 13 to 17-year-olds would buy it. So a lot of decisions that get made, good or bad, are for that particular purpose. And it's still a conversation that people are having. And I think like it is in no small effort, I think that the new series that's coming out has them aged the way that they are, because it's still, even right now, it is difficult to make a YA thing or younger.
Yeah.
Unless it's animation and strictly, once again, the parents are going to buy the movies for their kids. Like that's why the decisions are made the way that they are.
Yeah. Well, it didn't work what they tried.
No, sadly it didn't.
So Rick adds that the Sea of Monsters movie is, quote, a whole nother story, but he says it followed the same process. He explains that what he has included below are excerpts from 2 emails that he sent to the producers in 2009. Some names are X'd out for privacy, but thanks to my big brain, it's pretty easy to tell who the X's are, so we will fill in the X's. He says that he hopes if a reboot happens under Disney, he would, like fans, hope that it is faithful to the books and fun to watch. And based on the exclusive access I got to see at Comic-Con, checked both boxes. This show is going to rip. It's going to be so good.
Can't wait.
He says that Disney acquiring the rights from Fox is a great start, but his contractual powers are still, as he says, quote, zilch. He put it out there that he would like to consult and help if they want him. And then, quote, and if the new project was undertaken by a completely different team than the one which made the movies. Shots have been fired. He says that it's for fresh eyes and for fresh ideas, but come on, it's because you hate those other people.
Yeah.
He says he hopes that the new team will know the books and be passionate about them. He says that he would stay away from the project completely if he thought it was headed down the same road as before, and that if a reboot did happen, he may not be able to comment on it for contractual reasons, but readers should be able to pick up on how he's feeling based on his frequency of posts about it. If I post about it a lot, I think it's good. If I don't post about it, I think it is bad.
Or I'm on strike. Those are the 2 options.
Yeah, even pre-strike, he was like, guys, don't worry. I guess that's probably why he posted that.
Yeah. 100% why.
Now, here's something that made me gasp and cover my mouth. He says, quote, for instance, check out my website, rickriordan.com. Do you see any indication there that the Percy Jackson movies ever existed? No, you do not.
Delicious.
I appreciate the sentiment, but it is not true. If you go to the FAQ page on his website, he writes a lot about it and he mentions people by name. So he must have done that beforehand or something. Here's what's on the FAQ page. He says that he wasn't part of the process because the question is like, did you have anything to do with the movies? It's like the 4th thing down from the top. And he's like, no. He says he wasn't a part of the process. He says the movie was released in 2010 and he says it was directed by Chris Columbus and it was loosely based on my book, The Lightning Thief. Oh, loosely. He says he did not write the script. He says he did not help make the movie. He says he didn't even watch it. That's a lie. And he says he didn't watch it because he didn't want the movie version of the characters and the setting to change the way that he saw them in his eye. I think that is a legit reason, but I feel like he hate watched the movie. There's no way he didn't. Like, come on.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't know, man. Like, I can imagine wanting to, like, separate yourself so hard. I think at this point, if I were him, I would have watched it by now.
Now I feel like for sure. I don't know when he wrote the FAQ thing, but definitely now in prep for the Disney Plus show, he for sure watched it.
100%.
He says that he read the script for The Sea of Monsters, but never saw the film and knows nothing else about it. That also feels like a lie. He explains that he had no control over the films. Fox 2000 and Christopher Columbus did. He said, again, sold the rights early on. He says he sold the rights to garner attention for the book series, and then adds more about how it's very rare for writers to have control, and he compares the process to selling your house. Once you sell it, you don't get to decide what the paint color is and stuff like that. And he says, and honestly, it makes sense. These people didn't buy the rights for me to make a movie. They bought the rights for them to make a movie. So they are going to make the choices.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is that, like, so part of the system in Hollywood is that, like, everybody constantly reading things to adapt because everyone is terrified of original ideas. But if there are IPs that exist already, even if the books hadn't come out yet, there are loads of folks that I know that, like, will get an advanced copy of a book that hasn't come out yet and will buy the rights to it based off of the advanced copy or even just a summary sometimes. But that is a way for writers often to still have money. Like, I don't begrudge him selling those. Like, nobody knew, like, especially early on, nobody really knew. Like, you do whatever you can to make this thing work.
Right.
And also, like, the company at the time, I can also imagine we're like, we don't know what this is, but we can make this what we want it to be.
Yeah. I mean, as we said in the first part, like, the movie rights and book rights were purchased in 2004. That's when the third Harry Potter movie came out. So it's still in the thing of, like, we are doing this, but it's not, like, well established. Like, it wasn't until the later Harry Potter films that it was like, oh, we're doing this. And, we can make multiple movies per book. Whoa.
Well, and the third Harry Potter movie was a shift away from the first two. Like, I remember it being like they were wearing normal clothes and things like that. Like, they were still in that experimental phase. Because I remember when those movies were coming out and I remember everyone being very much like, why is it like this? I don't care for this. I did not read the books, so I didn't have any real understanding of it.
Yeah.
But
I'll say it's an incredibly faithful adaptation for the first two movies, almost to its fault. And it's wild that Chris Columbus did those movies and then this one, which are complete opposite ends of faithful adaptation-ness.
But I think that, like, it makes sense to me that he was very much like, okay, I have learned, if I were Chris Columbus, I have learned what didn't work. To your point, what things worked to a fault. I'm not going to do that again. So I want to do a different version of this.
I'm Alfonso Cuarón now. And then...
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah. So Brick ends the FAQ page thing about emails saying that he may be biased as a novelist, but there's no screen adaptation that can ever be as good as the images you make in your head. And I don't know, like, maybe I'm just like the wrong thing on that meme where it's like, how do you view an apple from 1 to 5? And I'm not like 0 where I can't imagine it, but like, I don't have like clear as day pictures in my brain. Maybe I'm broken, but like, surely this Disney Plus show is going to be better than what I saw in my head.
I don't know.
I get the sentiment he's going for, though.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I get what he's going for. I do think that, like, what Disney Plus will never capture is nostalgia and emotion. And I think that's a difficult thing to tell people because that is what a lot of entertainment is right now, is nostalgia and chasing after that. And I think as soon as we as audiences recognize that, like, we're not going to catch the nostalgia, we will enjoy things more.
Yes. And that's what I've been trying to, I don't want to say temper excitements, but like, I'm trying to approach the Disney Plus show when it comes out the way that I do Spider-Man. Like, I loved Spider-Man growing up.
Yeah.
I loved the 90s animated show. I love the PlayStation 1 game. And when there's new Spider-Man stuff that comes out, like, there's certain things that I'm like, the Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield, like, not exactly how I would envision Peter Parker. Like, sure, Andrew Garfield's way too sexy. You know, like, I'm envisioning a nerd. Yeah. But movies still worked for the most part. And then the new ones I really like. I think it's one of those things where, like, they're going to change some stuff. Some things are going to be different. And I think the key thing is you don't have to be super upset. Hopefully they will fix the thing where like it's faithful for the parts that are super important, but for the other parts that don't matter as much, like Annabeth not being a blonde white girl, like, yeah, we can switch things up and it's not that big of a deal. So that's the energy I'm trying to bring.
And I think that's also what he's sort of saying on this page of the emails, where it's like, I just want someone who likes the books. Because I think that like that is potentially what had happened with the first round, is that like you go in and you're like, well, I don't care about these books necessarily. I can't care about these books in order to make this thing that I am making. That is a way of going about doing adaptations. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but it's certainly a way of going about doing adaptations. However, with these, there is, I think, once again, the fandom speaks to, there is so much love and care for the characters and for the story that if you don't love the book, you're not going to capture an incredible part of the story and narrative. And that's what translates. Like, you have to care about this thing. It's amazing. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be a 1-to-1. There's just no way. That's not how anything works. But if you care enough about it and you work in a way that is loving and encouraging, then, to your point, it doesn't matter if Annabeth is a blonde white girl, because the heart of Annabeth will remain the same.
Exactly. So that was the FAQ. Let's get back to the email. Rick says that despite his feelings on the films, he is blessed and grateful that they brought in loads of new readers. And he says that many authors dream of this opportunity and he got to actually live it. But he closes before getting into the actual emails by saying, quote, I just wish, well, you can read below and see exactly what I was thinking and worrying about back in 2009. And let's get into email number 1 from January 2009. Note to producers. Hi, XXXXXXX, which I'm assuming is at least Chris Columbus and probably other people from Fox. He says that he understands that the decision has been made to age up the characters to 17, says that no one wants to see the film succeed more than he does. So he's hoping that they will make a few changes. And he says, look, I just think it's bad from a money-making point of view. First, he talks about it just destroying any aspect of it being a franchise. And he even says, quote, I don't know if you or your staff have had the chance to read farther than The Lightning Thief in the Percy Jackson series, but there are 4 other volumes. I like that he even says 4 other volumes as if they don't know it's a 5-book series. Like, oh, gosh, it starts so slow. And this one, compared to the next one, it's like quite nice. But the next one, oh, baby. He says that the whole series is based around a prophecy where Percy has to age from 12 to 16. So if he's already 17, that's just going to destroy it. And here's some reading into the XXXs. He says, quote, I assume that XXXX would at least like to keep open the option of sequels, assuming the first movie does well. I'm assuming he means 20th Century Fox. Then he says, starting Percy at 17 makes this undoable. I'm also sure that XXXXX for the first Harry Potter movie, that means he's talking about Chris Columbus.
It's very, very clearly Chris Columbus, yes.
For the first Harry Potter movie, some in the studio argued for making the characters older to appeal to a teen audience. Fortunately, they took the long view and stayed true to the source material, which allowed them to grow a lucrative franchise. This would have been impossible if they started Harry at 17. The same principle applies here. Outside of series stuff, he then says that it will also alienate the core audience. He says, I'm guessing the book sale numbers are important to XXXXX, 20th Century Fox, because you're hoping all those kids show up at the theater. He goes on about how the core readership is ages 9 to 12, and this is a movie that they're either going to want to see because they read the books or their parents are bringing them to it, and they are going to know that Percy was 12. They're going to be confused with him being 17. And he says that it has been signaled that this is a teen film, but what they don't realize is that the core audience is families. He understands them wanting to appeal to teens because they're a powerful demographic, and conventional wisdom says that teens are not going to go see a movie about kids younger than them. But he says Harry Potter proved this wrong, and teens still saw it. And he said that if you go ahead with the teen thing, you're going to upset the younger kids. So you can just make this movie about younger kids, and the teens will still see it. Look, there's proof. He then says, I haven't even seen the script yet, so I don't know how much the story has changed, but I fear the movie will be dead on arrival with a 17-year-old lead. And then in parentheses, to not upset the Logan Lerman stans, says, at this time, I had no idea who might be cast. Good save.
And I love Logan Lerman. I think, I've been a fan of him.
He seems like a perfectly nice human being.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting because I understand why the decision was made, but he's not wrong. And I was actually thinking about why he would post this. Posting these emails is such a strategic genius strategy in going, I want to be involved in the next bit. It's such good once again, not to talk about Taylor Swift, but it's such
please
good Taylor
talk about
Swift.
Taylor Swift.
It's such good Taylor Swift stuff of like, I'm going to put this out here so that fans are talking about this. And so that like, now that Disney has the rights, they are reminded that the way that this movie was done at the beginning was not as popular as they wanted it to be.
I did look up because I wanted to see exactly when the Fox deal with Disney finalized to see if it was like November 17th, 2018.
Right.
But apparently it was in... it says July 18 to March 2019 was like the process towards completion. Oh, I mean, October 2018 is the acquisition. So like he wrote this a month after, a month after. So I think maybe there was talks, or maybe it was maybe it was just him saying, Disney bought Fox. Let me just fire this off. It's a smart strategic move.
100%. I mean, once again, I don't know if we would have the reboot if he didn't do a version like this.
Pettiness wins. Everyone stay petty. It wins.
That's the sticker that I need you to have for this particular. Everyone stay petty.
Everyone stay
Pettiness
petty.
wins.
Pettiness wins. Yeah, that's the energy I'm trying to bring into 2024.
Same. Honestly, same.
Now, he concludes this first email by saying that he's spent the last 4 years touring the country, talking about the movie, seeing hundreds of thousands of kids. And I was like, oh, right. He's doing the Heroes of Olympus book tour and the Kane Chronicles book tour while this is all going on. And people are asking him about the movies. And before he sees anything from it, he's probably super stoked. And then now he sees the first rumblings about it and he's worried. He's like, I've been hyping this thing up for years. So I totally get that. I didn't even think about it. In this email, though, he says that kids are telling him, please don't let them do to the Lightning Thief what they did to XXXXX. And then in parentheses here, Rick currently clarifies another movie from the same producers. I did some sleuthing. One of the producers produced Twilight. I'm pretty sure he's talking about Twilight.
Oh, interesting. My other thought was Hunger Games, but that would have been Lionsgate. So that wouldn't have been, Twilight would have been that. Yeah.
Which I don't know enough about Twilight to know if it's faithful or whatever. I've just only ever seen the baseball scene, which I think is all I really need to see.
No, the baseball scene is cinema. It is cinema with a C. It's gorgeous and fantastic. Yeah, I was not a Twilight girly. I did see the movie. Once again, it was a very much like most of the women that I knew that loved those books enjoyed the movie because they were like, thank God somebody's just making something for us. Like, it's just nice that people aren't making fun of us and they're actually like doing this thing.
I'll have to ask. Kelly's a big Twilight fan. She's read them and seen them.
I want to know what Kelly's thoughts are
we'll
on
make a
this.
bonus episode on how much she agrees with these kids who said, don't let them do this. So Rick says they are looking for one thing. How faithful was the movie to the book? Make Percy 17 and that battle is lost before filming even begins. Thanks for letting me say my piece. I cared too much about the project to see it fail. So like all in all, a pretty normal, thoughtful, polite, hey, I've heard some stuff. You might make this mistake. Let me just let you know before you get in too deep. That might not be a good idea.
I can only speak of it if I were coming from the opposite direction. If I were like a producer on this, or if I were getting this email, this is such a lovely email. Like this is such a really nice, like, I am nervous about this. I do want to speak of this. And I think absolutely fair. Absolutely right.
Right. And I am guessing that in the next 2 months, he did not hear anything back from them because
100%.
The second email on this page is from March 2009. Notes to producers on the Lightning Thief movie script. So I bet they didn't reply and then they just sent him the script and then we get the email.
The email.
Email. Yeah. Meghan, the email. We get it.
Yes.
So he thanks the team for letting him look at the script. He says he thinks it's important that the movie does well. It's very important to him. He says that he also takes his role as advocate for the fans very seriously. They have been pleading with him for the past 4 years that the stories stay intact. And he thinks that the success of the movie and the accuracy of the adaptation go hand in hand. Quote, I see a direct correlation between how faithful an adaptation is and how well it does at the box office. I'm not sure the movie industry sees this connection as they keep making the same mistakes over and over again, but it's pretty clear to me and to the young readers I talk to every day. So the fuse has been lit. I wonder which ones he's talking about. Like, was the Aragon movie bad? Like, I want to know which ones.
It was.
Okay,
the Aragon movie was very bad.
Well, I think that I wonder what he is talking about specifically, because I obviously was not plugged into YA since I was a cool hipster that decided to not read anything YA when I was YA.
Such a YA queen. Yeah, I mean, at this particular time too, so 2009, we had loads of stuff that were coming out because people were like, oh, yeah, great. This is a market, I guess. interesting. We never thought about it. And so there were loads of stuff that came out. And yeah, so much of it was not great. Like a lot of it, to be honest, a lot of it was the fantasy stuff that wasn't great. Like nobody knew how to do fantasy and translate it in a way that like audiences could understand from the books.
Yeah. People saw Harry Potter and then Lord of the Rings and they were like, oh yeah. Or I guess reverse order. But regardless, those two movies were coming out and people were like, oh yeah, boom, good to go. Let's just do it. And
let's just do that. Yeah.
Chucking up some duds. So Rick says, there are things I like about this adaptation, which when you first read it, you're like, oh, okay. And then in retrospect, it reads more of like, there are things I like. Like it has a different tone upon reread. He says the beginning works well in terms of getting into the story. And honestly, I kind of agree. When I watch this, the beginning is like fine. It's one of those like, I get that this is a movie and they have to cut and change things, sure.
I still remember the beginning. Like the beginning is striking enough for me. And like there are aspects of the beginning that like fit even the nostalgic elements of reading that first book. Like, I think that the beginning is really good.
Yeah, it's fine. It's perfectly fine. He says he likes the Minotaur scene, and he specifically likes it appearing from a field of cows, which some of my listeners have pointed out, like, there's few things they like, and some people enjoy that moment, so he's not off base there. He likes Annabeth becoming a more physically challenging rival for Percy. I don't like what they did to Annabeth in the movie because they just morphed her with Clarice, so maybe in the script it didn't come across as bad on the page. But I guess if all he's writing is he likes her becoming a more physically challenging rival, like, yes, I guess that's nice, but not what actually happens to Annabeth. I don't think he would appreciate that.
No, but she does become a little bit more... I mean, look, she's not going to be a main character as much in the books because it's all from Percy's point of view, and that has to be the way that it is. So she doesn't get sort of a main role, and she does in the movie, and that is nice. She is much more of an active character than she is in the books, and that's really enjoyable.
I honestly think it's different, though. I feel like she is such a non-factor in the movie. Like, if you delete her from the movie, it really doesn't detract that much because they kind of give all of her stuff to Grover in terms of, like, explaining how the world works. In the book, when he's doing the learning phase, it's like half Annabeth, half Grover. And in the movie, it's all Grover.
Totally. But I think it's difficult to make that... I understand why they did that with Grover because the way that it is in the book, it's sort of static. Like, you can't visualize that on screen in a way that is... So you're constantly thinking about movement, right? Like, how is everything moving? And you can get away in some places with just like people sitting in a booth talking, but like it's rare. And also it's generally just like a Scorsese film.
Right. I guess it's harder because in the books, it's a lot of Percy narration is when he's talking about Annabeth. That's why Annabeth is 100%. Always like the character by most mentions in the books because he's always talking about her. But yeah, I guess like if you look at Annabeth times narrator Percy talks about her versus like the character Percy talks to her, those are different things. So yeah, it's harder in a movie.
Yeah. And I think a good example of this, whenever I'm talking about adaptations, I talk about Hunger Games because Hunger Games is entirely from Katniss's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
When you're making an adaptation, you have to think, well, what new thing can I bring to the audience? And so you get to see them making the games in the movie. And I think that like that has to be the question. And I think that like the question of what new do we bring to the audience is not answered in Percy Jackson in the movie when it should be. And I think you're right. Like it is Annabeth because so much of Annabeth is in the internal monologue and you just don't get enough of that in the movie otherwise.
Yeah. Rick continues that the Vegas scene is mostly good. He likes that the entrance to the underworld is the Hollywood sign, which like, yeah, it's fun.
That's it. And I remember the Vegas scene. Like that's the beginning and the Vegas scene are the two pieces from that movie that like I still remember to this day.
I think that's generally what the fans like. People are, you know, even before I watch it, they were like, the Lotus stuff is fun at least.
Yeah.
Like, let's have it all scored by Lady Gaga, of course. Yeah, it's 2009 when we're filming it. So he also likes the way that Smelly Gabe gets petrified at the end, which I didn't like, but I do understand from like a palatable for kids move because in the text, Sally does murder a man.
Yes.
So I get that. I just like that it makes Sally Jackson more of a powerful, independent, badass woman.
Yes,
but I can understand why a movie's like, hey, we can't have the mom kill a guy. Yeah. So I get it. He also laughs at the thought of the team parading around the U.S. with XXXXX's head, so Uma Thurman's head, because, in the books, they kind of ship it off and they don't carry it around. So he has some nice things to say.
He does.
A very compliment sandwich approach to this email, but then the next quote.
And then it all changes.
He says, line break. Having said that, here's the bad news. The script as a whole is terrible. And I was drinking a smoothie while I was reading this, and I came the closest I ever have to a genuine spit take all over my laptop.
It's so good. It's so funny.
Oh, it's so funny. So now the bridge has begun to burn.
Yeah.
He clarifies that he does not just mean that it deviates from the story, but he does make sure to take the time to say that it does, and fans will be outraged. Quote, they will leave the theater in droves and generate horrible word of mouth, which is true.
Mm-hmm.
But he says also the script just doesn't work on its own. Like, it just doesn't make sense of its own accord. But he says there is good news. The problems are easily fixable. Quote, when I first read the script, I'll admit I was plunged into despair at just how bad it was. If I were intentionally trying to sabotage this project, I doubt I could have done a better job than this script.
So good.
Not learning from my mistakes, I almost did another spit take.
It's so good. It's so
good.
petty.
And at this point, he had to have realized, and maybe it was because he didn't get a reply or whatever, or maybe he was just so angry. But I feel like you don't put this in the email if you don't think, they're not going to listen to me, man. Let me just fire off some fire here. Like, let me just get some shots up. So he says that after his initial reaction, he realized that the script could be fixed to appease both fans and casual moviegoers without having to lengthen it or add things that would increase the budget. He says, quote, I am choosing to take heart in your assurance that this script is not finished. That is the one thing we can agree on. It needs help. He's a great writer. He's good at writing so many things.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Goodness gracious. If I get into legal situations, I want to have like a lawyer team and then Rick to write the emails.
I do need Rick on the other side being like, because like, it's so wonderful to see someone write this. Because like, as a writer, oftentimes I have all of these feelings and opinions.
Right.
But once again, I don't have the backing to make sure that I continue working, which is my main goal. So like just reading so much of this, it's sort of healing because you're like, oh, I would like someone to kind of say this about things and just be like, hey, this was bad. It doesn't have to be bad, but it was bad.
I think it's also the freedom that he doesn't have to worry about like the IP being taken away from him, which is like another thing where like you could be worried like, I don't want to make this too upset. It could make problems for me. Like it's already gone. So he's like, this is the worst case scenario. So I'm just going to let it be known.
100%.
So he gets into his three overarching categories of thoughts, and he does reference that he has sent page-by-page notes as well. They are not included in this. Rick, release the Riordan cut.
Release the writer's cut.
Release the page-by-page. I'm sure there's like a true contractual, like you can't leak the existing script type thing. But if there's ever a world in which I become friends with Rick Riordan, I want to get drunk off Irish whiskey and like chill in his lounge and read the notes.
Yes.
The script.
Yes, 100%.
God. So category 1 is age appropriateness. He has a big issue with the movie not being family friendly. And I think this email must have worked because what he describes here is like not really seen through in the film. He makes this movie sound way more crude than it is. Like there's some crude elements and some rude stuff, like the Aphrodite campers are just bikini girls, and Grover gets all like aruga at the Vegas dancers and stuff. But it's not as bad as he's making it seem. So I feel like if anything happened from this email, I think they did listen to him here. And it's wild to live in a world where we all have to realize this movie could have been worse and would have been worse if Rick didn't get in the mix.
I think that's what's so difficult about so many. And once again, it's why we do get final drafts of scripts, right? You can find final drafts of pretty much any script, but you cannot find like certain elements. Like you can't find the writer's first draft, second draft, production draft, any of those. Mostly because, or you could probably have a production draft, but like a lot of the times it's protected because as a writer, I need to get the bad version out first.
Yeah, that's valid.
You don't know what all pieces aren't there.
Yeah.
There would be times where I would see somebody point something out about something I had written or whatever, and they're like, well, it should have been done this way. And I was like, yeah, we tried that. I did put that in the script originally and it just didn't work. And like people don't see those pieces. And so, I think it totally makes sense to me that somebody was in their first draft coming in and being like, here's the sketchy, I'm making it edgy. And then Fox very much being like, no.
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 Here's what he says about that. Quote, I don't mind being a little subversive and pushing boundaries, but there is nothing radical, fresh, or interesting. He's not an Oxford comma guy. I don't know how I feel about this. I feel like the books are Oxford comma. Otherwise, I wouldn't have
noticed. Yeah.
I feel like I would have noticed it, but there's nothing radical, fresh, or interesting about be ass or None of those words show up in the film. So
No,
clearly this
exactly.
worked.
Yeah.
It's a lazy attempt to make the script seem hip to teens, but such language has been overused to the point that it doesn't even rate a cheap laugh anymore. I love
not
that he
wrong.
brings up that it's just not funny.
Yeah, he's not
If you
wrong.
go this route, you lose the entire demographic of families with younger children. School groups who otherwise would take field trips to see this movie will stay away en masse. Neither do I believe you have to have cliche, crude language and gutter humor to engage a teen audience if you have a script that is funny, fresh, and original. As it is, the script will offend the parents of younger children and alienate what should be its core audience while gaining nothing. He ends this by saying, "Please do not sex up my children's story."
Yeah. Yeah. But like, honestly, he goes about it in a way that, like, once again, I think he is really incredibly intelligent by appealing to, hey, you want this movie to make money, right? The audiences that you're aiming for, that you're going to get, will not pay money for this.
Right. He is speaking their language.
Yeah. And that is, I think, why we start to see some of that, like, why some of that stuff's not in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Because he comes in from that perspective of, hey, money, you won't get money.
Here's the one thing you care about, you're not going to get it.
Yeah, yeah.
So overarching point number 2 is structure. He says he has no issue with streamlining things and reducing the number of sets. He understands. So I like that Rick recognizes what's going on. Like, he's not this idealist pie-in-the-sky guy. He knows a movie is being made. He says that cutting the Oracle, Mr. D, the search for Pan, and Clarice are all understandable because they don't affect the story's core. Shots fired at all of those characters. He does take issue, though, with some other things, and he lists them in thorough detail. Number 1, Persephone's pearls. He calls them a truly bad plot device, which they are.
Yeah.
He explains that in the book, Percy already knows that he needs to go to LA. He cannot fly because of Zeus. He's already got double motivation. He's got to find his mom, and he wants to find Hades, who he thinks has the bolt. And he's already got his goal of going to LA. So Rick says, quote, "This gives him plenty of reason to go to the underworld without tagging on some superficial quest for pearls that doesn't have any basis in Greek mythology." And I hadn't even thought about that when I watched the movies or anything. Rick's whole thing is that these always touch on some stuff and at least reference things that actually happened in classical Greek mythology.
Yeah.
And this pearl thing is just nonsense.
Yeah.
And I love that he is concerned about that because, a demographic is Greek mythology nerds who want to see the stories referenced and not just like shenanigans. It'd be like if Hephaestus was wearing Hermes' slippers with the wings. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, 100%. You're like, this doesn't, but you don't understand who is enjoying this movie. I think that is ultimately it, is that, like, because, like, I get why a studio executive would say, hey, can we add in the MacGuffin of pearls?
Mm-hmm.
It's a bad note. It's a bad pitch.
Yeah.
But I understand because, like, there is nothing a studio executive loves more than a MacGuffin because they don't understand why anybody does anything. So,
and a MacGuffin, for anyone not aware, that's like a thing that exists solely to move the plot along.
Yes, 100%. It's a plot MacGuffin. And this isn't all studio executives, to be very, very clear, so that I can continue working. But, like, it's a plot device because so many things, emotional choices do not always sway a studio executive. So like, I think that's why a studio exec probably pitched that, or the writer pitched it so that they could avoid a studio exec note of, I don't understand why he's going, because his mother is not enough of a reason to get him to going to LA.
It's bizarre. It's bizarre.
Yes.
So he continues. He says, this is the point where the script takes a hard left turn into weird. The story ceases to be The Lightning Thief, and it will have fans squirming in their seats and demanding a refund. And that is accurate because that is the exact moment. Once they introduced the Pearl thing, that's where I truly got mad at the film. Like, up until that point when I was watching it, and you can see this on the Patreon stream that I did because I streamed me and friends watching the movie. Like, you can see me up until that point just be like, okay, like, yeah, this is bad, but this isn't like scream at the TV bad. And then once the Pearl thing happens, I was like, oh, and then I understood. That was my 100%. Eureka, oh, this is crap moment.
Mm-hmm.
So his next point is Nashville, the Hydra, and Battle Bugs. Confused by Battle Bugs. Maybe Battle Bugs got removed because I don't remember there being Battle Bugs.
I don't remember Battle Bugs.
All it could make me think of was Beetleborgs, which I absolutely loved as a kid. And anytime we would drive by an abandoned house, I would be like, oh, is that the Beetleborg house with the big clown dude with the cleft chin?
Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying.
Anyway, he says that the whole scene is awful and alien to the story. Amazing. He postulates that it was done because making the Parthenon set is easier than making the St. Louis Arch set, and that the Hydra is more recognizable than the Chimera, but he thinks that these changes will lose the reader for no good reason, which is accurate. It's just changing for the sake of changing. And he also adds that this could be a good place to insert Ares, quote, as you mentioned, you're interested in that, which is a wild thing that they left the main villain of the book out of the book. And it makes me even more upset that the studio was like, we want to get Ares in there, but we just can't figure out what to do.
Don't know how.
We don't know.
Yeah.
How could we get him in there?
Mm-hmm.
Rick says his plan for the Ares introduction is on the page-by-page notes. At least release that. Like,
I know.
release the
I just wanna see
non-script
that.
version of the notes. Like, we're smart enough to figure out where they all go, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Give us the thing with the big redacted rectangles. That'll be fun. His next point is Luke. Apparently, and I think this is the other instance where a change might have actually happened, because the Luke that Rick describes here doesn't feel like movie Luke.
No.
Apparently, the Luke that he is referring to is, quote, a little slime ball. He says that in the books, Luke is older, cool, good-looking, and suave. He says that this creates romantic tension and jealousy with Percy. It hides Luke as the obvious villain, and it keeps the series arc in place because Luke becomes Percy's main rival. He says that the changes that they've made to Luke make the current script anticlimactic, which is correct. He just has this ho-hum fight, and then he's got to go to Olympus afterwards. And he thinks that fighting with Luke is a fine idea, but he notes, which I agree with, fighting Ares, the god of war, is a cooler choice.
Yes. But once again, I understand why they made that choice. It's a bad choice, but it's a choice of like, but this is a teen movie for teens, right?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously he should fight a teen, and we can't have him fight an adult.
Yeah.
Like, that to me feels what probably happened.
Mm-hmm. But they could have made it work if, like, Ares was at least puppet mastering Luke. But his complete removal from the film makes it not fun at all.
It just doesn't make sense. Like, I don't understand Luke's motivation otherwise.
It's just, I can do a better job.
Yeah.
It's just vague villain thing, which is the people in power are bad, and I'll be better at it.
Yeah.
It's just nothing.
Yeah. Why? How do you think that, like, where are you coming from with that unless you have someone telling you this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it just doesn't
add up.
Like I said, I understand from a perspective of like, here is a teenager fighting another teenager. That's enough. It's not. It's just like, why did you add the MacGuffin over here and not actually give us a bigger boss to fight?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He ends this by saying he doesn't want Luke to be a little creep. So I think that worked. I don't know what they did before, but they didn't make him a creep. Now he gets on to Persephone. Opens with, quote, talk about Deus Ex Machina.
All right, Rick.
Yeah, man, get him off. He says she wasn't in the original at all and that she's been added to patch up the now nonsensical story. He says Grover leaving the underworld off screen has no tension and is unbelievable. Correct.
Yeah.
He says the original story's mystery is much more compelling, so why not use it?
Yeah.
Goes on to Kronos. He says that having Kronos in there is essential if you want to make a franchise, since he's the bad guy in all of the movies. It'd be like having a Harry Potter movie without Voldemort. And like, like Voldemort's not like truly big time in the first movie, but is at least there a little bit enough to set him up.
You get to see him, and then you also, like, I think that if this movie had come out after, like, the first 5 movies of the MCU, I think we would have had a different movie. Because I think up to that point, we've had franchises, but franchises were not controlled by one main villain over the course of the 3 movies or whatever. That was sort of less known and less utilized. Whereas I think had like this movie been done in the middle of the MCU, there would have been more of an understanding on how to like build up a Thanos type villain or something.
Totally.
Which is what Kronos could have essentially been.
Yeah. He admits that you can get away with just a passing mention of Kronos, but in that case, you need to establish that Ares manipulated Luke. He can't just be acting on his own.
Yes.
And now I'm wondering, maybe that's why Ares has been in the trailer for the Disney Plus show so much, because they're trying to prove like, he's in this one, don't worry.
We have an Ares.
He's there.
I promise.
Which is absolutely ridiculous because he's the villain. Like, we shouldn't have to do it. But he's also a plot twist villain, so it's weird that like the trailer that came out recently shows Percy fighting him, but like, I guess they're just abandoning any sort of like suspense and leaving it all for like the Luke plot twist instead.
Yeah, I think they're very much, and look, I think with trailers especially, the folks who know the story know what's coming, and the folks who don't know the story have no idea who it is. So, like, it doesn't super matter.
So his next thing is the fight with Ares. And he says that it is a crime to exclude the most cinematic scene in the book from the movie.
Yeah.
You know, cinema.
Yeah.
I agree, because everyone has been asking me what scene are you most looking forward to? And it's the Ares fight.
Yeah.
It's the one that I did envision the most. Like, if we're talking about any scene that I truly pictured in my brain, it's the Ares scene.
Yeah,
so
100%.
actually, I retract my statement. I do think the version I came up with in my brain of that scene is the coolest ever, and Disney cannot come to the status of my brain, because that scene's going to rule. It's going to rule.
That scene's going to be so good.
It's going to be so fun. So he is correct. He says, quote, "You mentioned that the script is still being revised for logic and motivation, and I can understand why. The plot has been chopped up so thoroughly that it no longer holds together. As I said, I think this could be fixed without radically changing the scene structure that you've developed, but it would take better writing by someone who understands the story," which brings me to the last point. The writing. Here we go. Says the dialogue needs to shine, and currently it is dull. He notes the main issue is that it's not funny. He says he's not pushing for direct quotes to be included, not trying to act like his jokes are the best jokes, but he at least wants the tone to match. He says, quote, "One of the things that defines Percy is his sense of humor. He doesn't have one in the script." I agree. I don't think Percy tells a joke in the movie. He says like one comedic thing at one point about the sword being a pen. That is it.
Yeah.
There's no joke told. Percy cracks jokes all of the time. He cites that Disney Hyperion, but they were XXXs, but it's definitely Disney Hyperion. When Disney Hyperion acquired the book, they told Rick that a major selling point was the humor. So then he asks, why then do we want to settle for a script that is completely devoid of the story's trademark humor?
Yeah.
Which is a good point.
Absolutely.
Says there's no heart and soul to the story. The only motivator seems to be sex. Will Annabeth and Percy get together? That's A, not enough, and B, not done very well. So I feel like, again, that might have been reduced because I don't know that there's like that much will they, won't they in the movie. Like there kind of is, but it doesn't feel like that much.
Yeah, I do think that that was sort of pulled back because once again, I think from the perspective of like, if you want a long-term franchise, you do need a little bit more. I don't think that they pulled back because of Rick. I think they pulled back because they were like, oh, well, we need to not give this immediately.
Yeah.
But.
So he says about Percy that Percy needs to doubt himself and struggle with what it means to become a hero. So, oh, you mean the hero needs to go on the hero's journey? No way. What a concept.
Yeah.
He says, quote, on the romantic front, Percy is attracted to Annabeth, but she also intimidates and annoys him at times. He is not completely driven by hormones to get the girl, as he is in the script. Their relationship needs to be more nuanced. Agreed. The way he meets her in the movie is weird. He's like, give me her name. Like it's super and not Percy-ish at all.
Yeah. Well, once again, it's written. I have some thoughts. I just looked up the writer because it's been a while since I looked up the writer. So yeah, I get why this particular writer would have written it that way.
This is Mr. Titley, the guy whose first writing credit was on a moon conspiracy theory documentary.
Yeah. And then like comes to fame from the Scooby-Doo movie, which is
very much overly sexualized,
yeah, like I think that if you
movie's
look
good though, but yeah,
but like I think if you look at it's Scooby-Doo and then it's Cheaper by the Dozen, and like I grew up watching the original Cheaper by the Dozen movie, and I do think that like looking at both the Scooby-Doo movies and looking at both of the Cheaper by the Dozen movies, I understand how that is the writing that ends up happening on Percy Jackson. And I also get why he would have been chosen for this in that, like, he quote unquote adapted Scooby-Doo and quote unquote adapted Cheaper by the Dozen. However, neither of those are in the same vein as Percy Jackson. They're very different.
They're super different. So he goes on to Annabeth, says Annabeth needs her backstory with Luke, which informs her feelings towards Percy. Quote, the romance in the script is too obvious, too quick, and not nearly interesting enough. Where is the tension, the doubt, the conflict? He says that them getting together in the first book throws off their dynamic in the series. Quote, it would be much better if they kiss at the end, but it is still very unclear whether they're actually together. It should be more of a tease. So I think he's saying, like, if the way you've done it, make them kiss, but make it unclear. I don't know if he meant the end like of this one or the whole, if he meant like it's better if they kiss at the end of the series like they do in book 4. Whatever it is, I agree with him that the romance just makes no sense. Like they hate each other way too much and then they're like totally fine with each other after having one conversation.
Yeah.
It feels forced and fake and ugh.
Yeah.
Then he gets into Grover. He says, quote, Grover has become a cipher in the script. All he cares about is sex. There's a passing reference to his need to earn his stripes, but it never feels real, and Grover never seems worried about it. I don't know that Grover changed too much, because his description of Grover is quite accurate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But once again, knowing that this comes from the same writer as Scooby-Doo, I'm like, yeah, of course this is what you end up having. Like that is... And like no shade to this particular writer either, because he wrote for a TV show that I really love called The Cape, which I am the only person that watched it. But like, I know that like this can exist in a way that you don't have that so much of the sex. But like this writer probably needed to be pulled back in a way that he just wasn't being pulled back.
Yeah. Rick says if you're going to take out the Pan subplot from Grover, he needs something on the line. Maybe his reputation and backstory as a failed protector. Maybe this quest is his redemption. So then he says that below this email is his page-by-page critique. He says if they find merit in his comments, he would gladly revise the script himself, and they could take it or leave it as they please. He says he wouldn't change the length of the film, and even offers to pause all his other work to get the revision back to them ASAP.
Wow.
His focus would be on freshening the dialogue, adding Percy brand humor, and tightening up the logic of the plot. Quote, note that my rough suggestions for substitute lines below are just that, rough. I would take care to make the wording punchier and more economical. At the very least, please address my concerns and get another writer who has actually read the book and can make the necessary changes.
Ooh.
But at this point, I really don't trust anyone but myself to do it correctly. If the script goes forward in its present form, I don't need to be the Oracle of Delphi to foresee what will happen. You will lose the fans of the series 100%, but more importantly, the script will fail to impress even regular moviegoers who haven't read the book. The movie will become another statistic in a long line of failed movies badly adapted from children's books. No one wants that. And a year from now, I really would prefer not to be saying, I told you so.
Yep. Yeah. And he was right. He was absolutely right.
And then he has a note here on his website that says, this was followed by 12 pages of notes going through the script line by line. They did not accept my offer to rework the script. And then it is signed in Rick Riordan DocuSign default font. And that is the Rick Riordan email page.
So I don't actually think that they could have accepted his offer to rework the script.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I think it's very dependent on, so the WGA rulings on a lot of that are really difficult.
Okay.
Like, I think that they were in a rock and a hard place. They had already gotten this writer. They would have had to have done arbitration, and they would have had to have done, like, there's a world where he could have done, like, punching up, but I don't think that there was a world where he could have taken, like, he could have rewritten the script just based off of the WGA rulings. So, you know, that being what it is, I do think that there is some nuance that, like, that was on them for choosing this writer, but like they have to also stand behind the writer at the same time, even if he's right. Like Rick Riordan was completely right about everything that came from this movie.
Yeah, yep. Well, we finally did it. We got to the emails, which I think might even be more anticipated than me covering the movies on the podcast.
That's so funny.
They're
That's
great.
amazing.
They're so good. I'm so glad that they exist. I was afraid that they were going to get deleted at some point, so I saved them as a PDF on my computer just in case.
Yeah.
But thankfully, they're still there, so everyone can read them. And
yeah. I mean,
gosh.
it's, once again, it's a really, you can tell that he's such a thoughtful writer.
Yes. Yeah, it's one of those things. Every time I read something from him, I'm like, oh. And it's like all these different things. When he was defending the actress playing Annabeth, it was like, oh, yeah, he's a writer.
Yeah.
When he was writing the in memoriam type post about Lance Reddick, who unfortunately passed, the guy who's playing Zeus, I was like in tears. And I was like, oh, right, he's a good writer. And then now when we have scathing email, like, oh, right, he's good at so many different forms of writing. He's funny, he's emotional, he's sassy.
I mean, I already aspired to write like him, but like this, I aspired to like be this funny when I'm this angry.
Yeah, yes.
You know what
it's
I mean?
hard to do. It's really
so
hard to do.
Yeah.
It's impressive. It's really impressive.
Yeah, well done.
Good on you, Rick.
Good job, Papa Rick.
Good job. And Meghan, thank you so much for joining. If people want to find you doing stuff, where can they find you doing stuff?
I'm on MegFitz89 all across the way. TikTok, X, formerly known as Twitter, Threads, and Blue Sky. Literally any place that's not X, formerly known as Twitter.
Yep. And check out all the cool stuff Meghan does.
Thanks.
The comic books, the podcasts, the appearance on Meddling Adults. There's so many fun things. Many fun things.
Yeah, we have fun.
It was a good time. Well, Meghan, thank you for joining. Listeners, thank you for listening. Rick, thank you for writing these emails. And until next time, I'll see you later. Hey there. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Newest Olympian. This podcast is created, hosted, and produced by me, Mike Schubert. I also run the social media and the website. Our editor is Sherry Guo. The music is by Bettina Campamanes and Brandon Grugel, and the art is by Jessica E. Boyd. If you want to be a part of the show's community, you can find us on social media. We're at Newest Olympian on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. There's also a subreddit, reddit.com/r/The Newest Olympian. And then there's also the Discord that you get access to by joining any tier of the Patreon over at thenewestolympian.com/Patreon. If you want to get some TNO merch, you can go to thenewestolympian.com/merch. And if you want to support the show And as a thank you, get access to a whole bunch of bonus content. You can do that at thenewstylumpia.com/Patreon. Speaking of that Patreon, let's give a shout out to our producer level patrons: Kelsey Gillespie, The Damn Steam Nuggets, Vicky Garcia, Ellie Hoskov-Chova, Veronica Bartova, Haley Hastings, Robin Garcia, Frida Vikstrom, Megan Moon, Craig McRoberts, Taylor Payne, Giselle Salvador, Peter Johnson the Twin, Sabrina Balsiger, Boney Pony, Casey Williams, Polly Burge, Nikki Harris, Tatiana Schmidt, Sandra Rose, Josh Sayre, Josh Wilkie, Abby Ryan, Wise Girl, Ashton Gabrielson, Marco Redhouse, Caden Max, Samson Reeby, Riley Kiddes, Mary Kelly, Audra, Mrs. O'Leary, Rodith Kalma, Milo Kim, Harlan Christ, Cece Reeds 23, Sandkoff, Julia Kendall, Emil Oscar Thomason, Liz Cardigan, Sarah Neal, Ricky, John Drielsma, Rayla Matthews, Riley Draken, Luna Kadoon, Sky Mallory, Elizabeth Obermiller, Aidan Parziani, Biggest Tyson fan, Hunter Landstrom, Captain Jack Rackham, Sky Captain and the Princess, King Bastion, One Damn Distraction coming up, Ethan Robinson, Ginger Spursboy, Joshua Aid, A Cup of Solace, Meg Roy, Lux, Neil, Will Buchanan, Olivia Krenicki, Mrs. O'Leary Bestdoggo, and Bradimus Prime. If you want to support the show in a non-monetary way, simply talking about the show is so helpful. Word of mouth is huge. So you can tell someone that you know who loves Percy Jackson about the podcast, or you can talk to someone who's looking for an excuse to finally get into the Percy Jackson books about it, or someone who's maybe getting hyped for the TV show that's coming up and they want to understand what's going on. Or you could post about the show on social media, or you could leave us a rating and review on whatever podcasting app you're using. All of these things really do help. I'm very appreciative to everyone who has already done so, and to anyone who will do so in the future. But I'm just so thankful that you tuned into this episode, and I hope you tune into our next episode, where we'll be joined by our mythological correspondent, Dr. Moy McTeer, to talk about all the Greek myths that came up in the last Olympian. But until then, I'll see you later. Hey, how's it going? It's me, ASMR Mike. So the microphone that I use here in the Shubio is on a little tabletop stand. It's actually technically a mic stand for a kick drum, like the bass drum of a drum set. And a fun fact about that is it's way cheaper than a podcasting mic stand, because if you put the word podcast in front of audio equipment, you can double the price. Anyway, I'm going to run my fingers all around it, and you might get some like vibrating-y things through the microphone. I'm not sure if these will come through, but let's see. Ran my fingers all up and down the microphone. We'll have to see how that turns out. But anyway, thank you for listening.